All right, Dan, thanks for coming on the podcast today. It's so great to have you. It was wonderful meeting you. I guess it was a month or two ago now. And yeah, something like that. And I knew I had to have you on because the work you're doing is so cutting edge. And I know, I think that's overstated. The way, for a lot of people, like, oh, we're on the cutting edge. Like everybody's apparently on the cutting edge, but that's just not possible. But you are maybe even ahead of the cutting edge, just because stuff you're working on doesn't even necessarily exist yet. Everybody wants to talk, but nobody wants to listen. So here's my petition. Instead of division, let's make our mission to change the system. Learn how the world works. Learn how we can act. Welcome, everybody, to the Justice Podcast. Um, and I guess just kind of for the audience, a short little blurb on your bio. Spent time in the Air Force 6 years, something like that, in the Air Force as an officer. You're kind of consultant now, and then also have a JD MBA from Oklahoma University. Uh, I mean, we have slightly similar backgrounds, and so I understand that there's a lot of different ways that you could take your career, a lot of different options. Why is it now you're deciding you really want to invest time into the Advanced Air Mobility Institute?
Yes, well, appreciate you inviting me out, Bobby. Um, Honestly, this is it has a lot more to do with, we're right at the precipice of this new industry kind of getting off the ground, and really feeling like now, even though I'd heard about some of these developments, now is the right time because we've got a lot of really great momentum. It shows itself in efforts by the FAA. In fact, just recently they produced their urban air mobility concept of operation ConOps 2.0. And honestly, whenever a major federal agency is clearly making a concerted effort to update and continue to move this forward, that's pretty promising. Um, uh, this is this is honestly an industry that I've been looking forward to for at least a dozen years now, and a lot of it comes from my direct experience in the military. And that's of course a pretty common trajectory where service members are fielding truly cutting edge technology in that they're this not even available to the civilian market yet, and having kind of like proven it out, seen what it can do in a very dynamic, complex environment, as I'm sure you can attest. Um, we're now seeing, how can this be used stateside? And I mean, I think the possibilities are much greater than in the military context, and we can do an awful lot of good. So, I was I'm just thrilled at the opportunity to be a part of this and help shape it in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, and I guess maybe taking a step back because I'm sure there's some listeners who are like advanced air mobility, UAM, urban air mobility. What does that mean? I understand what those words might mean individually, but overall, this concept, like I have no idea what you're talking about, Dan.
It's an excellent point, Bobby, because a lot of times in this industry, we can get caught up in a bit of an echo chamber, right? Social media is definitely not to blame, but I'll just speak for myself. I'll go on my LinkedIn, and if you're not paying attention, I could be led to believe that everyone in the world is just going bananas for advanced mobility. Everyone's a expert, but that's because
Yeah.
tailored. and done a lot of outreach specifically to this industry. But no, you're exactly right. In fact, we need to do a lot more work on just defining these terms, and getting them to industry outsiders. And even terms like that, I don't even. It needs to be more about bringing them into the mix, rather than trying to, evangelize. The working definition that we use for advanced air mobility at the AAM Institute is advanced air mobility is it's in a lot of ways a transportation revolution. It's leveraging advancements in electric battery technology, getting the power to weight ratios optimized such that essentially we figured out as a community how to kind of scale up drones in a way that they're now large enough and strong enough to carry human passengers. So I mean, this is the future. This is it's a mode of transportation that that can offer through integrated AI, something to the tune of 10,000 times safer than driving your car today. It's something like
Wow.
100 times more quiet than a conventional helicopter. Um, so we won't have that noise pollution that's been a big deterrent to widespread use of helicopters. It's also roughly 4 times faster point to point, especially and honestly that's before you even factor in major bottlenecks and rush hour traffic. And of course, when you're flying above it, there are no stoplights. There are no
Mm-hmm.
there's no highway construction to limit the lanes. At least not now. Maybe there's a future where there's air traffic jams, but I think we're a very very long way from that. Um, but it's also supports some really fantastic net zero emission goals. um, ICAO has established a long-term aspirational goal for 2050 net zero emissions in the aviation environment, and advanced air mobility is a big piece of that because um, uh, operations, we do have a number of models that are hybrid, but it's the vast majority are fully electric. In fact, some of these are actually making use of hydrogen fuel. Um, that's certainly another big piece that we try to spread the good word about, that it has environmental benefits. And then lastly, there's this big element of, like you're saying, Bobby, with cutting edge technology. It's really cool and exciting, but sometimes, just more generally speaking, it's easy for people to lose sight of the humanity of it. Right? We're so quick to like, well, what if a machine could do this too? And kind of the catalyst behind the Advanced Air Mobility Institute in its initial form had to do with a bit of my background and education in human rights law. And I know we touched on that a bit about how the kind of the lawyer in me looks at a situation like this and say, okay, the technology is substantially cheaper than a conventional helicopter, not only to purchase on the front end, but to operate. In fact, they're already talking
Mm-hmm.
about not requiring a license to operate because it's that sophisticated in its technology
Wow.
and collision avoidance and whatnot. Um, That being said, I am a pilot. I'll always advocate that we have, professionals operating any kind of air vehicle. Um, Perhaps we'll get to the point where the automation is sophisticated enough that we can trust those systems, and I do think that's pretty exciting. But um, vehicles that are that are much cheaper to purchase and to operate, and are that much more quiet than a conventional helicopter. The lawyer in me, you know, starts to worry about, okay, well, how can that be? How can technology like that be abused? And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
honestly, when looking at it from a policy perspective, we need to make extra sure that there are additional, resources allocated to protect against um, use in human trafficking, for example. Because then all of a sudden, no border walls matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can be moving people pretty quickly and discreetly, um, and in there, it's yet to be foreseen whether they'll follow similar kind of um, flight plan registration, because they're going to be the frequency is going to be dramatically higher than commercial air traffic today, and certainly more than general aviation, where people are just going out recreationally. And then, of course, if you're engaging in human trafficking, my guess is you're probably not filing all the required
Right.
paperwork anyway.
Most likely not.
I
Yeah.
think that's safe to guess. Yeah.
That seems like a pretty safe bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's talk about the kind of the lawyer
Sure.
perspective. Um, Obviously, you've got more experience in thinking about this and applying it than I do. I just wrapped up my first year of law school on Friday.
Congratulations.
I'm very excited about that. And then, but related to that, I mean, you might still remember from like all the stuff we learned in torts and all these other cases. Like, there's so many different cases that established law related to trains,
Mm,
and kind of that was the cutting edge at the
okay.
time is train transportation, and you're transporting people, you're transporting goods, a lot of the same stuff that you're going to be moving with
Mm.
AAM. And I guess my question would be, is this something that we like AAM? Is that something that we just say, hey, let's see how it evolves, let the courts figure it out, like use the rules that exist, let the courts figure it out, or do we need to try to plan this more intentionally so we don't end up in a bunch of lawsuits?
Yeah, yeah, fantastic question, Bobby. And yeah, again, congratulations. I remember, I
Thanks.
remember this time well. It's very exciting, and let me do make sure that I clarify. While I did graduate law school, I'm not a practicing licensed attorney. Um, so we do well to we bring in a lot of aviation law experts, to answer the more particular questions. But no, your point about you're exactly right. Train locomotion technology was had its time in the sun, being cutting edge, and it raised a lot of new legal questions, and we're facing something similar. Transportation, the movement of goods and people, I think will always have a high degree of legal implications, and of course regulations. We got to make sure that if anyone's providing services like that, especially across state and even international borders, that the traveling public can trust that there are a lot of checks and balances in place, to keep them safe. Um, Truth be told, we're actually building out a pipeline of JD candidates, and hopefully one day soon graduates for the Advanced Air Mobility Institute. Um, I would love to see lawyers be, their skill set utilized in a way that's much more proactive. Um, because at times, I'd love to hear your take on this as well. It feels like law very often is reactive, and we're kind of scrambling to
Mm-hmm.
figure out after someone has taken a loss, um, experienced some kind of injury. Then we try to figure out, well, okay, well, who's to blame? Who's gonna take the fall and try to make the victims whole? And with transportation, especially brand new technology like this, if we just kind of open the floodgates and everyone can be flying these these eVTOL is the term, and I'll quickly define that. eVTOL is you'll see it depicted with lowercase e, capital VTOL, and that stands for electric vertical takeoff and landing. Those are essentially these kind of supersized drones, if you will, that will carry the human passengers. Um, yeah, it's a case where, uh, in the event that there's a major accident, it's going to scare an awful lot of people. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to position ourselves that being purely reactive, we might be kind of knee-jerk reaction from the FAA potentially to just, hey, let's just shut it all down until we get this sorted out. And if we've got multiple iterations of that, pretty soon people are going to say, no, I'm not going to be a fool. I'm not going to be a guinea pig in this way. And you know, to me, hats off to the FAA. They've got an incredibly difficult job. In some ways, they haven't faced something quite as challenging as this to, try to scramble and certify not only the aircraft but the pilot training. Uh, who's going to operate this? How do we manage the traffic? This is a massive undertaking to try to figure out how to integrate, because it's not just the passenger carrying. It's advanced air mobility also includes UAS drones, and all of the, not only, people often see them as the payload is simply a camera that's taking some kind of mapping or imagery, but package delivery is becoming more and more popular. Amazon and Walmart are UPS. In fact, from a health mobility perspective, there's been some amazing breakthroughs in terms of transporting human lung or human kidney, and
Mm.
it, it's a case where if we can get these like very critical time sensitive deliveries freed up from ground traffic, uh, that in and of itself directly translates to lives being saved.
Yeah, I it seems like there's so much potential for this technology. And as I was kind of reflecting on this, thinking about this episode as we were preparing, um, it reminded me of an episode I recorded a year ago in a completely different industry. And that was with a cannabis business attorney. And the way that he was talking about the regulatory framework for that industry is, at one point it was the prohibition model of, everything's just outlawed. And then, the question is, do you evolve into a regulated model or what he called the tomato model, where there may be some rules, but it's pretty much just free reign. Um, and he mentioned, he's like, well, the tomato model can help innovation because you don't have this upfront capital required to maintain the regulation and like all these different tests that have to be run. Um, but I think when you start to get into areas that are particularly risky for human life, for property, for whatever, like aviation, if things were to go wrong,
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to have a regulated model. Like I don't think you can have just anybody can do what they want. But you also don't want the prohibition model because, just say, oh, well, it's dangerous. Like, let's just prevent anything from happening because there's so much that we can add to society by having this.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're exactly right, Bobby. And it's regulation is absolutely essential for something like this because yeah, very quickly, um, you know, even in the hands of not not necessarily bad actors, but just individuals who are, I don't know, going for a joyride, let's say. Aviation is the kind of thing where there's a whole nother axis of risk involved. Um, so many more things to potentially go wrong and to crash into. Um, and of course, with a car, if you run out of gas, often you can just kind of like pull to the side of the road. We'll tow you and figure it out. But I don't need to go into gory details of what happens, if you run out of your power source, in an aircraft. So,
Sure.
um, yeah, it's we believe strongly at the AM Institute that there's a path forward that we can that we can balance these risks, and it's really not like that whole kind of like philosophical thought experiment of actually speaking of trains, um, you know a train down this track and multiple people will die. You have an opportunity to pull a lever. It's gonna we're gonna switch tracks and you will have knowingly um, taken action that led to another person's death. And what are the ethical implications? That's not at play here. Um, it's it's certainly possible if you're when you're moving people in any by any means, there will always be risk, especially because
Mm-hmm.
the point of transportation is to move those passengers faster than they could walk on their own, right? So, um,
Yeah.
so it's a case where we would never have to directly decide, these person's life is, whatever the number is, we'll say 100. Those 100 lives are worth more than this one individual life. We won't have to face decisions like that. um, Rather, it's a case where transportation is inherently dangerous in any form. um, but we look at it in a way, you know uh, driving an driving an automobile today is wildly unsafe. Sometimes I'll be driving down the road, a divided highway, and you've got just that bit of yellow paint is all that's keeping you from, head-on collision with another driver. There's a lot of trust in our, fellow citizens, um, but um, truth be told, I came across a statistic here in the U.S. There's something like 62% of the population lives beyond an hour ground drive time from a proper emergency room, right? And the reason that's so relevant is if you needed that emergency medical attention, you can't get there. We're knowingly
Mm-hmm.
losing. I don't know what the numbers are, admittedly, but um, all of those people are being lost unnecessarily today, in large part because it's hard to justify launching medevac, to every single home that might need it otherwise. Not to mention, the infrastructure is not there to get a
Mm-hmm.
helicopter, to enough places. Um, and of course, we've got quite a shortage of helicopter pilots to operate them. But advanced air mobility, um, we have the technology today to save many more lives, not only here in the U.S. but around the world, and that's that's a factor that I feel like needs to be at the forefront of these kind of decisions of, how do we balance it. uh, it doesn't make sense to live in the world where we say, okay, no new innovations or adoption of technology if it's possible that someone might get hurt or even lose their life, because there's too many people that we could save today if we just implement it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a tough reality, and but it's also there's hope in that the technology really could bring a lot of good to the world. Um, Something I want to ask you about is this new campaign that you've started to make vertiport word of the year. What is that, and why are you trying to make it word of the year?
Yeah, so this is exciting. So this will be the first audience to to hear it in a public venue. This is something that we've been kind of working on in stealth at the institute. But it goes right to the heart of your point earlier, Bobby, about there's so much jargon. And what's interesting about the term vertiport, um, this is something that's been around in official government documentation. The FAA produced an advisory circular back in 1991. Right, so this term's been around for quite a long time. It's in hundreds and hundreds of academic papers and journals. But every time I sit down to answer a request for information, for example, how do we move this industry forward, and I'm in Word, and I'm typing up a an opinion brief, and uh, vertiport comes up with that red squiggly underline. And
Hmm.
just to think about, United Airlines recently teamed up with eVTOL manufacturer Archer to and announced that they're going to start offering advanced air mobility, essentially air shuttle operations as soon as 2025. And I love the ambition. I absolutely hope that we are ready in time. That being said, vertiport is not in the dictionary. So the the audacity that we would start offering this kind of cutting edge technology in real world operations, and that we don't the dictionary doesn't include a word that we can use in common English to describe the place where we take off or we land. I have to imagine there's a lot of people who are like, I don't feel so comfortable about that. This thing's so new that we don't
Mm.
even have a word yet. And, um,
Yeah.
so that's we're trying to, a lot of people are, they're just thrilled by integrating greater and greater levels of artificial intelligence, autonomy, um, uh, hydrogen fuel cell, fascinating stuff. We're trying to do a little bit of that, catching up a bit on some of the bare bones, right? Guys, to
Mm-hmm.
get the public on board, we need to make sure this is at least in the dictionary. We can't have conversations with words that don't exist yet. uh, right. So
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
so vertiport, yeah, this is a push where, um uh and if I'm not mistaken, would love to hear, if you know better, Bobby, or certainly any of your audience. To my knowledge, it's never happened, so we got a shot at making history here, for a word in the same year to enter the dictionary and become word of the year. I don't know that that's happened before.
Yeah, I don't either. That would be pretty exciting though. Either way, And I'll make sure I drop that petition link in the podcast
I
description.
appreciate
So
that.
everybody's listening to this, make sure you go there and sign up. I've already signed. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, maybe just as a way to wrap up the interview, Dan, what should we be most excited about, maybe from a business perspective, with AAN?
Yes. So from a business perspective, I mean, it's the way that I see this. There's just so much opportunity. It's mind boggling. Um, we're approaching it in a way that's to really reach full potential. We need a vertiport, which I'll quickly define as a neighborhood place for vertical takeoff. That's the kind of scope that we need to get to, right? The infrastructure for these eVTOL flights really needs to be at the level where it's in every single neighborhood in the world, right? And um, there's a lot of hub and spoke models where people assume that they need to kind of shuffle through major hubs located at modern airports, but we can be a lot more efficient. And from a business perspective, if there's a vertiport in every single neighborhood, that is an incredible number of new jobs. And we'll need complementary services, right? The possibilities are near endless about how do we meet the needs of the traveling public in a way that, as we see it, the vast majority of advanced air mobility flights will likely take place where a modern airport today is neither the destination or the origin. When I think about the business opportunities, I mean, it's pretty substantial. If you think about any kind of goods or service that cater to modern airport travelers, I mean, that kind of effort is going to need to be made, on the level of individual neighborhoods. A whole lot of really exciting new developments underway. And truth be told, we can't afford to do any kind of gatekeeping. I always come back to that expression
Mm,
of, if it takes a village to raise a child, you know, what does it take to raise an entire industry?
mm, yeah. Wow. I love that. Well, I'll end it with that. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. This was great.
Yeah, absolutely, Bobby.
This isn't financial, legal, or medical advice, but we do discuss how we might invest our resources for a healthier society.